That's before 9 this morning. But how to accommodate a growing population, increase density, that's what we are constantly told, especially if we don't want to be sitting in the traffic that Vic was just talking about on those long commutes. But is infill, increased density, the best way to look at what our city will need to thrive in the future? What are the other issues? What else do planners, developers think about, or at least need to think about, when they're making their plans to accommodate a growing population? There's some new work that's been done at the University of Western Sydney, and we'll have a chat about that in a moment. But give us a call if this is something that is your experience, you know, what's working and what's not, as the city tries to expand and increase density. 1300 222 702 is the number. The co-author of the new study from the University of Western Sydney is Dr. Michael Grosvenor, and he's here this morning. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Lee.
All those poor people sitting in long commutes, that's what we don't want, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
Before we talk about the research as such, just talk us through the idea of density and how planners decide how dense an area should be. Is it a complex formula, or is it pretty simple?
Well, it is a bit complex. The reason for our research was to better understand the associations between where we live, what we live in, and the sustainable behaviours that people perform at home. We were particularly interested in people's electricity use, water use and transport. And we found several strong associations. Where we live and the transport that we use was quite a strong association. But what we live in and electricity use and water use wasn't such a strong association.
What does that mean exactly?
So doing the research, we wanted to find out some statistical associations, and what people live in, the house that they live in, wasn't such a strong influence on people's water and electricity use. It was where you live had a strong association with people's transport, but we found that philosophical beliefs, political attitudes, socio-economic factors actually influence people's electricity and water use more so.
Right.
So the assumption that providing more apartments, for example, or more detached dwellings is not as sustainable as one might think. It's not going to drive a sustainable outcome as much as what people's beliefs are and their attitudes politically.
Okay, so what drilling down to those associations a bit more, what exactly are the kinds of beliefs that mean people are more inclined to engage in sustainable
Well,
behaviour?
I think the political attitudes, for instance, your Green voter, your left of centre voter might have an aptitude to want to save electricity and save water use. But also socio-economically, more educated people, those with above average income seem to be associated with more sustainable behaviours. So where the geographical links between where people are more sustainable than maybe other parts of Sydney, it was more associated with those factors rather than what they lived in, like an apartment.
Okay. What are the implications of that for what's going on in our city as we speak, which is urban infill increasing density?
We find that there seems to be an assumption in metropolitan planning that if you provide more apartments, for example, that'll achieve a sustainable outcome. What we're suggesting through our research, it's more about where you live, say next to a railway station, than what you live in. That's what's going to drive more sustainable outcomes.
But are planners looking for sustainable outcomes, or are they just doing numbers and saying lots of people coming, build more units?
I think the assumption around the units from a planning perspective is you get as many people as you can around public transport. But over a given area, a mix of housing types can deliver you the type of population density you might require around public transport nodes. So not just one model, not just apartments, and that's it. A mix of housing choice, walk-up apartments, terraces, villas, even some detached dwellings.
And all that's going to depend on which part of the city you're talking about and what the...
That's right. So obviously the focus is on the rail corridors, for instance, but we seem to have this one model, high-rise, as the panacea for everything.
Okay, let's take some calls and see what people are experiencing on the ground. Dr. Michael Grosvenor is here, Associate Director of URBIS and co-author of this work that we're talking about this morning. Lola has given us a call from Kurrajong. Hello, Lola.
Hi.
New estates going into Mount Druitt and Penrith. We were looking at some of those the other day when we were in that area, actually. What's your concern about them?
Yes, they didn't seem to have the foresight to put in any bicycle lanes next to the road. They're crowding in as many houses as they can, and no wide roads or bicycle lanes. Imagine how nice it would be for the children and the teenagers to be able to ride their bikes to school.
Yeah, I know bicycle lanes can be contentious. Ask Clover Moore in the centre of Sydney, but...
That's right. I mean, some cities do it better than others. There are some topographical problems in Sydney in providing cycle lanes on constrained on roads, especially in the inner urban area. Canberra's a city which does bike lanes well. So there are factors behind why bike lanes go in some areas and not others. But certainly people that live accessibly close to services, shops and the like really want to use their bike and to walk to those services. So I think bike lanes should be more thought about as a mix in the accessible city.
And I wonder if bike lanes is an interesting one. I wonder if we tend to get them in the inner city areas, the closer in areas, but if they tend to be ignored more on the fringes.
They do, and it's probably more space on the fringes. However, what our research also found is that in dispersed areas, it's a high car ownership and a high car use because the distances between activity centres is a lot larger, and car is really the only option for many people. But certainly the space for bike lanes is there.
And if you put them in, I mean, you build it and they will come, I guess, in part is the assumption.
Well, the RMS, the XRTA, have done a lot of work in actually trying to, any time there's a new road or bus lane or transit way, they have looked at putting in large bike lanes with those facilities.
A couple more calls, and just this one text from Kate who says Lane Cove, giant fail in her view, from a balanced combination of dwellings to a ghetto of apartments is how she's describing it.
We seem to drop away very quickly from apartments to dwellings, and I suppose that's one of the messages we would like to give, that there's probably a better mix, not only from an urban design perspective, from an affordability perspective and a choice perspective. There seems to be detached and then high rise.
Yeah.
We're trying to suggest that there's a mixed response that we could probably promote.
1300 222 702 is the number at 20 to 9 on 702 ABC Sydney. How should